Be a part of the force that powers truth in journalism. Your support helps to combat false media. Cash App NNV News.
This is Brian E. Muhammad with Global View on NNV News. At the close of 2020, Africa has the lowest COVID 19 numbers than the United States, Europe, and Asia. The Center for Systems Science and Engineering at Johns Hopkins University said COVID 19 cases in Africa reached 2.6 million people, 2.2 million recoveries, and 62,000 deaths, far lower than predictions from world bodies. In other news, Abdullah Muhammad, a star and stalwart in the cause of freedom, justice, and equality, has died. The world and the Nation of Islam lost a great and significant one with the passing of Minister Abdul Allah Muhammad, formerly known as John Shabazz, who passed away at 89 after battling long health challenges. Today, to talk about this and other developments in 2020, is Dr. David Muhammad, the Eastern Caribbean representative for the Nation of Islam, and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Brother Dr. David Muhammad, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much, Brother Brian. It's a pleasure to be here, and greetings to all of the viewers and listeners.
Yes, sir. Well, I want, of course, so much happened over the last year of 2020, which many people no matter who you talk to, most people are saying that 2020 has been an unprecedented type of year, particularly with COVID-19 and whatnot. And and of course, it opened with turmoil and it closed with turmoil, and of course, a little bit later in the program we want to talk about, of course, this great man that many people know and some may not know so readily of, Abdul Allah Muhammad, who was a strong representative of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and helper to Minister Farrakhan. But let's start with some of the happenings of 2020. You know, I guess we can go in any direction, but let's look. I guess the biggest thing that's on people's minds right now is the mitigation of COVID-19 and its effect on the world.
Yeah, well, Brother Brian, so many things could be said, of course, about the year 2020, but in summing it all up as probably the most long-lasting imprint that would be stamped on that year going into the future would be, from my vantage point, that 2020, probably more so than maybe any other year within the last 4 or 5 decades or so, was a forced acceleration into the modern technology that we would have eventually ended up confronting maybe within 5 or 10 years from now. Because of the COVID-19 lockdown, the restrictions, the new rules and regulations of social distancing, the wearing of masks, and the entire social change, the world was forced to embrace a lot quicker some of the new cultures that we would have eventually arrived at in a number of various fields. Now, in particular, with education and blended learning at the primary schools, the secondary schools, and the tertiary level institutions, even for the university that I lecture for, the Department of the University of the West Indies, 1 year prior to COVID-19, we were already in training to initiate online teaching, blended learning, internet-based classrooms, and to also have platforms online for students to submit assignments, for grading of courses to take place, for evaluation and assessment of students' projects. All of this was already in the making. And maybe it would have taken a few more years for it to go 100% online, but due to COVID-19, of course, that acceleration was forced. And within just about a 2-week period of the lockdown being initiated, we had to find some way to immediately transform the educational environment within which these institutions existed into a new, unfamiliar kind of on the job training kind of situation, but it had to be done. And it was done. Meanwhile, of course, this had a tremendously damaging effect on the economies of many countries. And under the traditional Western capitalism, there has already been a gap between the rich and the poor, which was probably worsened by the fact that there was massive job losses, loss of revenue and earnings for a lot of businesses, and many industries were completely threatened, such as the global transportation industry, for one. So the main point in this new burst in technology is that if 2020, as unpredictable as it was in 2019, if 2021 is going to be just a fraction of as unpredictable as 2020 was in 2019, then we have to brace ourselves for something earth-shaking. You know, the Fall of America by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad ends with the chapter, "The worst is yet to come." And in the Honorable Elijah Muhammad writing on the worst is yet to come, it's not pessimism, but it is a foresight that is calling upon us to engage in some kind of introspection, because the Honorable Elijah Muhammad examined the relationship between the once black slave and him being on the doorstep to liberation and how he is going to handle that freedom, equality, and liberty. And we are at a moment, at the threshold of 2021, where we have to see ourselves as an independent nation who can make its own decisions, as the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said for the Criterion on July the 4th, that when it comes to the COVID-19 situation, we have to have our own doctors, medical professionals, scientists, virologists, and epidemiologists to be able to inform us as a community of where we should position ourselves, especially as it pertains to this vaccine, which some countries are discussing whether or not there should be legislation incorporated to force people by law to take these vaccines. So now, more than ever before, the Black community in the Western Hemisphere has to see itself as an independent, isolated yet partially integrated social entity that has its own decision makers, leadership, foresight, insight, and some kind of strategy for us to go into 2021 without being the burden bearers, not the wealth sharers, and to be the victims of decisions that are made by those outside of our community who never had our best interest at heart. So I would say to any of us that as we go into the year 2021, we must expect the unexpected, be prepared for everything and every single possibility that might come, and have a plan of action to be able to confront whatever new destabilizing forces that we may face.
Mm. And it's interesting that you said that, you raised it to the importance and the level of self-determination as Black people. And, you know, we opened up the program today with the first news piece out of Africa. And those numbers that we talked about, that 2.6 million people, uh, that that was the total for the year of those affected, 2.2 million recoveries and 62,000 deaths. And these numbers came from today, which is
Yeah.
December 28th. These are numbers up to date today. This is Africa, you know, and of course you're down in the Caribbean, and I don't have those figures in front of me, but there seems to be, uh, at first, there was a great expectation on European nations, the US, and of course, world bodies like the World Health Organization, who determined when they were predicting this early on that Africa and in particular is going to suffer massive blows, and with these figures, these are actually the lowest of the regions in the world. you know what do you think? Because, and I'm raising this as you ended on that point of the need for self-determination moving into 2021. What can you say something about the fact that Africa's numbers, a
Mm.
continent of 1.6 billion people now, or something like that, it's over a billion people there,
Yeah.
yet the numbers are so low in comparison. What can
Well,
you Mhm.
yeah. Well, there are so many factors, but I want to look at the entire picture and reiterate the importance of the conversation that you're raising, because a missing link in our consciousness as Black people in the Western Hemisphere is that many times Africa and also the Caribbean has been excluded from the conversation. And there are so many movements, leaders, episodes of African history, and events that take place on the African continent and also that take place in the Caribbean that are a bridge or a link to missing consciousness in Black America. The Tuskegee experiment has been a major talking point. I will say that in 1993, when I went to Los Angeles, I got a tape from the minister. And we'll come back to that trip, of course. But I remember listening to a tape of the minister, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, in 1993, which he did in the 1980s, where he was talking about the Tuskegee experiment, where 100 Black men were deliberately infected with syphilis by the United States Health Department and the Center for Disease Control, and they were denied treatment for 40 years from 1952 to 1972. At that time, there were still many people who considered that to be a conspiracy theory. And then it wasn't until 1997, 3 years after I heard the minister speak on it, but over a decade after the minister spoke on it, that then President Bill Clinton offered a presidential apology to those 100 Black men who were deliberately infected with syphilis. Unfortunately, there were only 4 survivors at the time. Now, because that information has been so heavily circulating around the African diaspora, the manufacturers and producers of these vaccines are forced to confront that truth, address it, and now we're even seeing on major news networks globally like CNN, where they actually pulled out the press conference or the press statement by President Bill Clinton, and they've been doing documentaries on the Tuskegee experiment. HBO did a movie about it called Miss Evers' Boys. There was so much information that has come to the fore because the greatness of Black leadership raised those concerns on behalf of the Black community. But here I'm making a point about information from Africa being the missing link to connect the consciousness, as our brother Abdul Halim would say, connecting the dots. Because the final newspaper revealed over the last couple of weeks that there was another case that was equally disturbing in some aspects as the Tuskegee experiment, but because it took place across the Atlantic Ocean on the continent of Africa, on the west coast in Nigeria, and many of us never heard about it, never saw it on the news. It was never a talking point in our community, but thanks to the Final Call newspaper, it came out. And that is that in 1996, the same main company, Pfizer, who are responsible for producing these COVID-19 vaccines, carried out an experiment in the northern state of Kano in Nigeria, which has now been known as the Kano experiment, where 200 African children were involved. And after the experiment, they suffered deafness, muteness, brain damage, and 11 of them even died. And the thing about it is that Pfizer hired a brilliant African doctor by the name of Dr. Abdul Hamid Issa Dutse. And Dr. Dutse was used as the face for the Kano experiment, but yet still, of course, the entire project was being led by Pfizer's offices in the United States. And this act was so dreadfully wretched that the state of Kano in Nigeria sued Pfizer, the same company that is producing the COVID-19 vaccines. The state of Kano in Nigeria sued Pfizer for $2.75 billion. And the government of the Republic of Nigeria as a country sued Pfizer, the same company that's doing the COVID-19 vaccines, for $8 billion US dollars. Now, how is it now, after what we went through with the Tuskegee experiment, by the fact that this information started off being so buried and uncovered that slowly but surely we began to get information about it, and before you know it, it spread again through the dissemination of information through education. That message was hitting, making waves of the Black community. And now that they finally answered on the Tuskegee experiment, who is going to answer? Who from Pfizer is going to have a press conference this week or next week and explain to people of African descent globally what really happened in their Kano experiment in Nigeria? And the dastardly thing about it is, for the state to sue them for $2.75 billion, that's the state of Kano, and the government of the country of Nigeria to sue them for $8 billion, Pfizer actually got away with out-of-court settlement payments of $75 million. After being sued collectively for $10 billion, they get away with paying $75 million. Now, we have to connect the dots of the Tuskegee experiment with what happened in Africa, because Nigerian blood runs through our veins as Black people in the Western Hemisphere, through the Yoruba tribe and the Igbo, the Hausa, the Coromantans, the Tamna, and the Mandingo. That's us. That's our family. But we also have to connect those dots with the dots of the 1950s, when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad warned us not to take the polio vaccines, which contained the cancer-causing monkey virus SV40. And we also have to connect that with the smallpox vaccination campaign that took place in Africa from 1966 to 1977, where smallpox was apparently eradicated off the face of the planet Earth, but HIV/AIDS was introduced by the millions simultaneously in Africa as a result of an injection from the World Health Organization, which they themselves admitted. Meanwhile, in America, it was through a hepatitis B vaccine from the Center for Disease Control. And again, I want to make it clear that every time I discuss these topics, I only deal with the verified information. I only deal with the content that the perpetrators have admitted. I stay away from that which is still up and under contention and review. So, bearing all of that history in mind, and coming back to what the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said on July the 4th, 2020, the criterion, that with that record, with that history, and with that consistent pattern of using chemical and biological warfare and medical genocide against the darker peoples of the planet, it would be irresponsible of us to roll up our sleeves voluntarily, walk towards the slaughter like sheep, and take an injection without using our brains to process and analyze the truth of the history of what happened to us in the past, and then come up here, choose to close our minds and close our eyes and not think for ourselves and have someone else make decisions for us. Even if the vaccine is the solution to the problem and the answer to the questions and the means by which we could get out of the COVID-19 crisis, it would still be completely ignorant and foolish for us to not do our proper background research and get the truth, get the facts, and get the required information. So we have to look at what's happening in Africa. We also have to look at what's happening in the Caribbean. And all of these so-called benevolence and free giveaways and the imagery of the helicopter from the United Nations landing in some village where there's no electricity and no running water, and they're doing us these great favors by exposing us to medications. We have to be, in this day and time, a lot more critical thinking and a lot more rational in the choices that we make in regards to issues such as this.
Okay. Well, let's take this. Let's parse it some more. Let's unpackage it some more. Um, as you stated, they have a history of misusing us as their human guinea pigs in these
Yes.
experimentations and the different things. Let's go to July 4th of this year as you raised the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan's message, the criterion. For our viewership and those who may be a little confused about, if this thing has ravaged the world in the way it has, um, and we're talking about, being very wise and careful
Yeah.
concerning the solution coming from these same people that have a history of misusing us. Can you talk about what the minister also raised concerning this depopulation
Yeah.
campaign? And of course, we, just as a matter of a reminder to our audience, the last time that Dr. David was on with us, we discussed this depopulation plan to cull the population of the earth. Can you talk about that? Because, and I'm going to ask you, do you think that this is, as we're connecting dots and whatnot, do you think this is really the bottom line root of this problem now with, how they chose to use and handle COVID-19, where Black people are concerned? Can you talk about this memorandum?
Well, Brother Brian, it's almost like you're looking for a destination and you're seeing multiple signs pointing towards where they claim that place is. Once you follow the signs and the route on the map that tells you that it's taking you to a specific place, it would be foolish to attempt to challenge or contradict what the map says, what the street sign says, what all the arrows pointing in the direction say. It's clear that if all of the signs lead to a particular destination, that if you go down that trajectory, you will get to that specific place. When it comes to depopulation, this has been an obsession of European peoples from the earliest times. There's always been this phobia about the population increase of darker peoples and decrease of Caucasian peoples, so much so that it is as if it is subconsciously and psychologically incorporated into their plans for infrastructural development of towns, cities, and countries. The great Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, whom we lost recently, author of the ISIS Papers, explained that racism, which is a synonym for white supremacy, expresses itself subliminally in the ideas of the Caucasian people who are driven to think in that way. And she gave the analogy of the ball games, and the most clear one was the pool table, where you have a large white ball on a green surface representing the Earth, and its objective is to get rid of or eliminate all of the different colored balls. And then the last one, which is the black ball, victory is declared when the large white ball is able to dismiss or eradicate or annihilate the black ball. When you look at history, colonization, enslavement, colonialism, even barbarism, mercantilism, and Booleanism, it has all of these economic perspectives and theories and eras of history where there has been this grab for the wealth of Africa and this lust for the mineral resources that are in the possession of African peoples. The National Security Study Memorandum number 200, dated April 1974, which was written by Dr. Henry Kissinger as top national security advisor for President Richard Nixon, it stated that America's top national security concern was depopulation. But it gave a rationale as to why this concern was considered to be so urgent for the white American population. And the reason for that was because America had only 6% of the world's population, but they were consumers of approximately 34% of the world's mineral resources. And those mineral resources are in the same areas that they've identified as wanting to reduce the population of: Africa, Asia, the third world, the Caribbean. In those places, numbers are growing. The white populations are decreasing in the time when what must be done. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, looking at Islam in Europe, showed that the Muslim families are reproducing at such a rapid rate, while there's a zero population growth for the Caucasian families in Europe. When you take all of this into consideration, and then you get some insight into what the solutions are considered to be for these issues. You're talking about germ warfare, injections, chemical and biological warfare, vaccines. Now we see with Bill and Melinda Gates and some of the major global stakeholders, again, this obsession with reducing population growth in third world countries, as was the case, of course, with the National Security Study Memorandum. But Richard Nixon was a Republican president who's expected to have a different policy than a Democratic president. He was replaced after Gerald Ford came in, and Gerald Ford pardoning Nixon. You know, some are saying there may be some deja vu coming up with that pattern. But Jimmy Carter was a Democratic president. Then he came in, and his top national security advisor, John D. Rockefeller III, had a very similar proposal to Henry Kissinger's National Security Study Memorandum. This time, the Democratic version of it was Global Project 2000, where the key objective was to reduce world population from 5 billion people in 1975 down to 2 billion people by the year 2000, which is an impossible feat unless genocide is part of the agenda. But not only have you had the NSSM 200 report or the Project Global 2000 report, you've had a number of initiatives that have reproduced the same agenda and objectives that were discussed in those proposals. In particular, HIV/AIDS spreading rampantly through Africa. You have had Ebola, and it seems like we are on a pattern, especially within the last decade, of a number of experimental viruses that come and go with such devastating impact. Some old diseases such as malaria, yellow fever, and cholera coming back in such a potent new form that in the Caribbean we've had a virus called chikungunya. And chikungunya, again, spread so rampantly throughout the Caribbean and terrified the public and then disappeared mysteriously. Same thing with the swine flu in 2009 going into 2010. As a matter of fact, I was traveling in and out of Mexico, Honduras, and Costa Rica and Panama around that time. And that was the first time that I saw people wearing masks. Because even after the swine flu had dissipated, the H1N1, you still saw some people comfortable with wearing masks while traveling internationally. Now, all of a sudden, the COVID-19 comes in. And again, as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, history is best qualified to reward our research. If we go back, you will see so many signs that something like this was brewing. You had that book that was written back in 1981 by an author named Dean Koontz. The name of the book was The Eyes of Darkness. This was 40 years ago. And here an author is writing a book about a strange virus that is going to come out of Wuhan, China, that will cause pneumonia-like symptoms and spread all over the earth. I mean, literally describing COVID-19 to a T. There's this great question, as we hear this old cliche, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Likewise, we ask the question, does life imitate art, or does art imitate life? A major department of art is literature. Literature comes from ideas. Ideas come from culture. Culture is the way of life and practice of a people. If part of the culture of the Europeans has been to find some kind of germ, some kind of vaccine, some kind of medical experiment that could achieve the objective of reducing population growth in third world countries, and that culture will now come out in ideas, and who is to know that, or who can say if there was ever any plan that was so explicit and so detailed that this could have been planned? We don't know. These are questions that we must ask, but we have to connect the dots. And by the fact that all of this information resides in untapped reservoirs of consciousness, as the Nation of Islam and the Nation of Islam's track record for bringing out this kind of information for the benefit of the Black community, now is the time, going into 2021 in particular, that we have to listen more than ever before, but in particular, we have to think more than ever before.
Yes, sir. So, Brother David, man, that was right on point in terms of your explanation. Let's do this. We want to take a quick break, and we want to thank everybody, one, for tuning in to NNV View, and let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back on the other side and continue this conversation.
Greetings. This is Tarika Shakir Muhammad with National Network View. This week's issue of The Final Call honors a servant, scholar, and soldier, Minister Abdul Allah Muhammad, and his life's work and contributions to the Nation of Islam and his sacrifices in the Black struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. He was a follower of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. To read more about Student Minister Abdul Allah's life and legacy, subscribe to finalcalldigital.com. And thank you for tuning in to NNV News. Please share your thoughts with us in the comment section below, follow us on social media, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel, NNV News. This is Tarika Shakir Muhammad with NNVnews.com.
Be a part of the force that powers truth in journalism. Your support helps to combat false media. Cash App, NNV News.
This is Brian E. Muhammad, and we're back with Dr. David Muhammad, an Eastern Caribbean representative for the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. And we was talking about, before the break, Africa, the coronavirus and the effect, the Memorandum 200, this depopulation aim And I want to continue that. And then, of course, uh, as you saw on the break, the cover of the Final Call
Yes.
newspaper this week is our brother's Minister Abdul Allah Muhammad. And of course, we want to talk about him and his life, work, legacy, and whatnot. Um, so now you were saying that 2021 we really have to, as they used to say way back in before both of us was born, and probably before our parents were born, put our thinking caps on, right? And 2021 we cannot go to sleep. And so let's talk about this more, the importance of facts. As you said, you don't like to talk from, just guesswork. You want to make sure that you're talking from verifiable information. um how important is that for the average one of our people today, to make sure, because we have, and I know this is his last few days in office, but President Trump made
Hmm.
this very famous, this term fake news. And of
Yeah.
course, you're down in the Caribbean, and you know how the media can be in the Caribbean, and certainly here in North America. I always say, as I lead into this question for you, I always say that the United States is, with all of its media, you turn on the average satellite TV channel, satellite TV service, there's hundreds of channels, hundreds of newspapers still, hundreds, there's massive information online. So there's a lot of information flowing, but we seem to still be misinformed. It's like we're the most informed, misinformed
Hmm.
people, you know. So can you talk about, just as some more about the importance of
Yeah.
having adequate information with so much information flowing?
You know, in this day and time, with us journeying towards knowledge and consciousness on this information superhighway, we have to capitalize on the interconnectivity of truth. We have to be able to access truth of one concept from multiple references and sources, each of which will verify its actual facts, which is sharing. Just yesterday, I was listening to a story coming out of the United Kingdom about a man who had spent some 20 years in prison wrongfully, and he was seeking justice. And someone gave him some very simple advice, which worked tremendously for him. And that was, they said, Google, as simple as it is, Google the arresting officer who was at the root of your case. And in so doing, he found out that this arresting officer was actually involved in a number of wrongful arrests and had a number of lawsuits against him. Once they were able to interconnect with each other, the historical experience of each case strengthened each and every other case. It's like the global scandal taking place now with the Catholic Church. It started off in the Boston Archdiocese by someone coming forward, and then other persons in other parts of the country and in other countries saying to themselves, after hearing the information uncovered, saying, but I have had an experience like that too. And they contact someone else who was silent. Then before they know it, they have a chorus voice of victims of the same crime, while each thought that they were the only one. Malcolm X, in his last speech in Detroit, Michigan, February 19th, 1965, spoke about 10 people being in a room, 9 being unsatisfied with the conditions, only 1 being satisfied, but the other 9 are unaware of the state of mind of each of the others. And because they are not aware of how the others are thinking, they remain silent and dissatisfaction stays intact. This is how the Black community is. We have so many collective common concerns that are relevant to each and every single one of us as a community, but we're thinking like individuals. And as a result of that, many times, a lot of our major challenges and problems that are solvable remain unaddressed because of our disunity, division, and distrust. And if we can find a common platform and a common voice that can confront all of these individual challenges that are creating such a enormous deficit in our community, socially, economically, spiritually, in almost every single aspect of social life. That is what is missing among us. Now, the mind of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is like a university of faculties, departments, libraries, and teaching departments that each have a focus on different social interests within our community. That within itself is a unifying force and a forum through which we can come together on the basis of what we have in common rather than remaining divided on the basis of what our enemies would prefer us to remain disconnected on. This is why 2021 is such a crucial and critical year, that it has to be the year where we unite, settle our differences, open skills banks and think tanks, and work together in spite of the different religions that we may be a part of or the different ideologies that we may have embraced, our different social class backgrounds, and even our different nationalities. How can we let the stamp of a passport from a white government affect the relationship that I have with my Black neighbor simply because I was picked, chosen, and branded and placed under some kind of legal system with numbers that still need to be decoded that we know nothing about? How can I let my enemy choose my friends? How can I refuse unity with my family based on my enemy's view and opinion? And if in 2021, because our enemies are constantly monitoring us, and the minister said when he spoke to us just a few days ago that one of his major concerns within the Black community right now is that we know our enemies. We have made the dreadful mistake to think that those whom we are emotionally upset with temporarily are the ones who are our true enemies, when our true enemies are those who come to us with grand promises and who would paint a picture of euphoria, which is a trick. And we've suffered that same deception. We're talking about 400 plus years. And if we don't, in this day and time, in this 2021 coming up, if we're not prepared to start to think like a community, then we'll be doomed. And as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said in the last chapter of The Fall of America, the worst is yet to come.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's talk about our brother. And again, as we said earlier, that this man, Abdul Allah Muhammad, who is a historical figure that some know and some may not know so readily, but there's a rich history involved. And I just wanted to kind of open up this part with the words of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. He said, describing his brother and friend of 60 years, a life well lived, a job well done, and he described Brother Abdullah Muhammad, as one of the most proficient teachers of Islam uh, in the history of our movement, the Nation of Islam, and during the time of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, um, under back in the 60s, more so, um, there were only two representatives that were like top representatives that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad truly relied on, to deal with the outside world, so to speak, to deal with, you know, it was Malcolm X and John Shabazz. And of course, John Shabazz, who later was given the name from Minister Farrakhan, Abdul Allah Muhammad. And before, I want to ask you, Dr. David, about your thoughts and reflections on him. You know, the I was told in interviews about his life as we did this coverage on him, that and it goes back to the point that you were just making about dealing in actual facts, dealing with verifiable knowledge. And even back in the 50s, I mean, late 50s and throughout the 60s and throughout his years of ministry, everybody who I spoke to, Brother David, everybody who I spoke to, there was certain threads that was the same. His penchant, I mean serious penchant for facts and research, and going after that which we're teaching and representing, but going after it and really getting profound degrees of knowledge in what we're talking about, which goes back to what you were just saying, the importance of, of not just shooting off of your head, but go and verify, go and bring it and look it up. So I just wanted to say that to him because as you was talking, I was thinking about him, because this is exactly the way he was. And so, what is your reflections of Minister Abdul Allah Muhammad?
Well, I only met him in person once, which would have been October the 9th, 1993, in Los Angeles for the birth celebration of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad for the Healing the Wounds event. But coming into the Nation of Islam in 1992, the messages from Minister Abdullah Muhammad were a key educational source. And Abdullah Muhammad was one of the first people that I've ever heard described as a walking encyclopedia. The first tape that we got from him was on the 7 prerequisites of guerrilla warfare, starting with valor, respect for the leader, knowledge of your terrain, understanding the enemy, etc. And that would have been done in New York. And of course, our beloved brother Abdul Hafiz Muhammad would have introduced him on that tape, which was in 1986. And interestingly, 1 year before that, to this day, one of the minister's most historic speeches, Power at Last Forever, at Madison Square Garden, October the 7th, 1985, Minister Abdullah Muhammad actually introduced the minister on that tape. Now, he, to me, represented the academic excellence that should be expected of us as students of the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And after listening to him, he would have inspired me to go and research so many things. I mean, a lot of the tapes, a lot of the lectures that he gave that we had were centered around the true history of Jesus, the Immaculate Conception, the truth about Christmas. I mean, it was from Minister Abdullah Muhammad that I first heard that Christmas was against the law in America, in the state of Massachusetts, for 30 years. I think it was from 1651 to 1681.
Yeah.
That celebrating Christmas was a crime,
Very interesting.
You learn things. But one thing that his teaching on how to eat to live was so profound, because I mean, again, coming into the nation in the early 90s, and a lot of these debates with those who will be referred to as our Orthodox Muslim brothers and sisters, a whole list of fasting and how to eat to live by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, which some had refer to it, that's un-Islamic. I heard Minister Abdullah Muhammad teach one time that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, the best way to eat is to practice the fast of David, which is to eat one day, fast the next. Eat the next day, and fast the day after that. And Minister Abdullah was explaining the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in teaching eating one meal every other day. And when I heard that, that led me to just, go in depth to try to pull out of the hadith all these missing jigsaw puzzle pieces in the hadith from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And what I had stumbled across was the fact that we're taught in How to Eat to Live by the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad that we should fast for 3 days every month. Now, some of the Orthodox Muslims call that undesirable fast, uninterrupted fasting. And I thought that was a bit peculiar. So when you go into the hadith now, because we know, we don't think, we don't have a hunch, we don't speculate, we know for a fact that what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught and How to Eat to Live was 100% right and exact. But yet still the Orthodox Muslims will say, no, that kind of fasting is un-Islamic. When you go into the hadith, there is a hadith where the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, tells his companions, do not engage in uninterrupted fasting, like what we do, the fast for 3 days. Okay, now they take that and say, see, the Prophet said that, so you shouldn't do it. But the hadith continues. You know what the companion said to the Prophet after he told them that? The companion said to the Prophet, but dear apostle, that is how you fast. And that is what you do. The thing is, all this talk about following the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, it's the lifestyle, it's the wisdom, it's his practices, it is Islam in motion, not how he looked, not how he dressed. And how is it that as Muslims, we are forbidden 100% to have images of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him? There was this film that they did on the Prophet, I think it was called Messenger or The Messenger in the 1970s. And I remember asking some Muslims recently, do you know who starred in the film portraying the Prophet in that movie? No one. There was no character in the film about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. There was no character portraying him because it's forbidden in Islam to represent his visual image. They had the film operating from his perspective, so what he's seeing. Now, my point is, if it is 100% forbidden for Muslims to represent any visual imagery of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, then how could you possibly see any logic in the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad being an attempt to emulate how he looked? No, we've already outlawed that. And now you're going to tell me your practice in Islam is to try to reproduce an image of the Prophet in yourself, but not in your deeds, your conduct, your thoughts, your attitude, your mannerisms, your behavior, your culture, your charity, your service to humanity, your prayer, your fasting. That is the real sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And the Prophet Muhammad, according to the hadith, used to engage in the same kind of fasting that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad instructed us to engage in How to Eat to Live, books 1 and 2. And thanks to Brother Minister Abdullah Muhammad, in hearing him teaching on how to eat to live, that sent me down that track. And almost everything that he said was like a doorway into a whole lot of other information that was just so mind-blowing. I remember hearing Sister Ava say it one time, we are so thankful to Allah that he's on our side, because you don't want to go up against a man like that. So, his teachings were so profound. And last thing I'll say on him I remember in the late 1990s, where many of us were guided by the minister. And, for Ramadan, many of us got on that path and stayed on that path to stay away from meat, from eating meat. And Minister Abdullah said he asked the Honorable Elijah Muhammad once why it is best not to eat any meat. And when he raised this, it was like there was so much suspense of what is the messenger possibly going to say. And he said the messenger said that the reason why it's best not to eat any meat is because it is at the end of life's process.
Wow.
And then he hits us, and I'm like, what? He said, if you eat a fruit, a vegetable, a plant, wheat, corn, peas, beans, anything, it is in growth. And the nutrition that you get from it is at a point where it is still expressing life. It's unfolding,
Wow.
it's developing, it's ripening, it's seasoning.
Wow.
But meat is the only thing that you can consume, which is on a perpetual pathway of decay. There's no life to come. And I thought, wow.
Yeah.
That's how Minister Abdullah was. He was so incredible. One last thing on Minister
Yes,
Abdullah. He did a lecture entitled Time. And of course, his column was 11:55. So it's very centered around time. Remember, not only did the messenger teach a series on the theology of time, but even the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in the early 1980s did a series entitled The Time and What Must Be Done before the 2013 series. And even in around 2008, 2009 at Mosque Maryam, the minister did a few lectures entitled The Time and What Must Be Done also. So Minister Abdullah Muhammad once, he did this lecture on time. And I thought it was kind of funny. But in the lecture, he was saying he always told the brothers, make sure that you come to the meetings early. You have an appointment, get there early. Whatever occasion it is, get there early. And he said one day they had a meeting for 7 o'clock. And a brother he said he got there at like 6:59. 1 minute before 7, like right on the nose. And he said a brother confronted him and said, Minister Abdullah, nothing bad, but here you are, always talking about being on time, being early, making sure that you're there before everyone, and But look, it's like 1 minute before the time for our meeting. Look, you just walked through the door. And Minister Abdullah said to the brother, said, well, you're right, but I left home on the highway, car runs out of gas, had to walk with a can all the way back to a gas station, get a ride back to the car, lose out all that time, then jump in the car after putting the gas in manually, and then drive into the mosque and still get it here on time. So the point is now more than it stood before. Always be on time. You have to cater for the excuses in advance. And that's the wisdom right there.
His mind.
It's miraculous that I only met him in person once, as I said.
Yeah.
But again, that was at the very beginning of my pathway, just like 1 year into the teachings.
Yeah.
And it was a blessing. Just that simple exchange that I had with him was a great blessing.
Yes, sir. And and what you just described, that was him. He was just so wise in how he taught these lessons,
Yes.
And it's almost like a man before his time, but he was on time. you know.
That's right.
But you had to really appreciate and think, because he was a very, very deep sense of humor. I mean, he
Yeah.
always cracking jokes, but there's always
Yeah.
something in what he's saying,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and something to learn from. And so I'm hoping that I understand his family is working on his works in terms of his lectures and
Mm.
things, the information
Mm.
that they have compiled. The
Mm.
book 1155. Everybody,
Mm.
it seemed like everywhere I go and I'm hearing about him, this is, man, I need to get that book. I want. Is it going to come out?
Mm.
And so we're hoping that the family,
Oh, that would be an
will.
incredible book.
Oh man, yes, yeah, and of course, we, from the network as well as the show, and as well as from me personally, because I
Mm.
served under him when he was the
Mm.
minister at Muhammad's Mosque number 7, from
Mm.
19. He got there July or so of 1984,
Mm.
and he was there till either 86 or 87, one of those, and but it was just he was that one. And when you brought up brother Abdul Hafiz Muhammad, may Allah
Mm.
forever ever
The
be
study
pleased.
of him. Yeah.
Yes, oh
He was
yeah,
called Super K by
Super K. In fact,
Brother
Abdullah
Abdullah.
gave him that name,
Yeah.
Super K. You know, and so he is a giant among giants.
Mm.
And he never compromised on the teachings of the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, you know, and as the minister said in the rebuilding of the Nation of Islam, Brother Abdullah Muhammad was that go-to person, for advice and for and I'm gonna say this one thing as well, that Dr. Ava Muhammad, she worked very closely with him, of course, in
Yeah.
Chicago, and she talked about, of course, the proficiency of his mind, you know, and 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 the kind of man that he was in terms of his heart, because he came back to help
Yeah.
the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in this rebuilding effort. And as those of us in the Nation of Islam are studying in study guide number 18 right now, rising above emotions into the thinking of God, that he some in that study guide, the minister encourages us to look at the various people in
Mm.
history, and even the various people around us as they went through circumstances in their lives, and try to walk in their shoes, he said, right? And so Dr. Ava mentioned the fact that when you look at those who came back to help the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in the rebuilding, who were ministers
Mm.
of the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, see their view of our leader, or our of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, their view, um, their eye was maybe a little different than you and I, who came
Mm.
as a result of him making the
Mm.
commitment to this
Mm.
mission to rebuild, because they were in the
Yeah.
classroom with the Honorable Mr. Louis Farrakhan. And it was Brother Abdullah again who was the stalwart of a person in those days.
Mm.
Because like the minister said, only two were two of the greatest ministers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the greatest representatives at that time, was Malcolm X and Brother Abdullah, who was known as John
Mm.
Shabazz at the time. So for him to come back and help his brother,
Yeah.
you know, and submit to his the leadership of his brother. See? And it was because they were truly friends. And the minister mentioned during his janazah service that they never had a bad word between the two of them in the 60 years that they've known each other. 60 years. They met January of 1960. We're getting
mm,
ready to go into January of 2021, but
mm,
he knew him exactly 60 years. See, and they never had a sore word between each other. But I'm showing you the kind of man that Abdullah was in the sense that, he could have been like some of the other ones who felt,
mm,
oh, well, why should I submit to Lewis? You know what I mean? You know, I'm trained under the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I'm his peer. See? Well, you may be a companion, but the Honorable, I would say that Brother Abdullah Muhammad uh, saw his brother in the light that his brother is, you know, and even with that, they it was never a big I and big and little you, because the
mhm,
minister don't roll like that.
mhm.
Anyone who knows the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan know he do not. That ain't even his attitude. It's not even you know. And if you're blessed to be around him, you have to be careful, as you know, brother. Dave, you've been around the minister yourself. You know he has a certain way of brothers. We're brothers. You know what I mean? Not
Mhm.
leader versus, but we have to be careful not to step out, of that real equation. But brother Abdullah Muhammad, it was a testimony to the level of heart that man had, you know.
Yeah.
And I learned so much after he passed, even though
Mm,
I was blessed to, he was my minister in those years. And I've
mm,
always kept high respect for him. There's a lot about his life that I didn't know at the time, because he never carried himself like, this is what I've
yeah.
accomplished. He never carried himself like that. You just got to talk to him to know, man. He's coming. He's coming from a whole nother level of thinking. You know. But I thank you, brother Dr. David, for being
Yes,
with
sir.
us this week. As of course you have your running schedule to be with us every few weeks like this, and the good work that you're doing, because you're making a legacy yourself in what you're doing in Trinidad and in the Eastern Caribbean. Um, the I guess the what's fitting to ask you in terms of what's in store, and this would be our last point. What's in
Mm,
store for the Kwame Ture Center there in Trinidad, and your work for 2021?
yes, sir. Well, firstly, we await guidance and instructions from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan regarding our standard procedures, our
That's right.
meetings, FOI classes, MGT classes, study groups, and so on, the Sunday meetings, which have all transformed to online incredibly. Um, we have our educational programs continuing for the students. We have about 60 or so students from across mainly the community, Port of Spain, East Port of Spain, and we're teaching the lessons program: maths, English, literature, business, accounts, social studies, and biology. We have the expos. We had four for the year, as a matter of fact, three since the COVID trade fair expos. Observing the social distancing, the wearing of masks, hand sanitizing, etc. Just basic operations to continue to sustain um, the wider organization and the services to the community. We gave out 20 food hampers last week. We still have the Friday Juma. We just recently resumed the Friday Juma prayers. And we're doing our best to remain as community oriented as we can, while still, guiding our people to the Sunday lectures by Brother Ishmael Muhammad. And, we're doing our best to stay rooted, to stay connected, to stay grounded, to stay in touch with each other as a family, and, to share the wisdom of the minister. One of my real loves is to prepare excerpts of the minister for radio and television, the radio and television programs that I do, and to always incorporate different moments and then break them down or explain them, which is my job. So I'm able to bring the minister's teaching, especially the July the 4th message. We've cut it up in so many different pieces and played it on mainstream radio for the public to have conversations on. And, that is a blessing to have that as a job, really. And, the study guides 1 to 21 seem to have more relevance now than ever before. Wisdom, such as how to give birth to a God, seem to have more relevance now than ever before. Justifiable Homicide, the series, which was the basis in a major part of my PhD research in looking at Black youth across the Caribbean from juvenile delinquency to criminal gang activity. Inshallah, I'll publish that next year. But we're so thankful to the minister for continuing to be a beacon of light and wisdom for the entire Black community. And, I want to also acknowledge the work being done in Barbados, Jamaica, Guyana, St. Vincent, Antigua, and also St. Croix and Bermuda, where from time to time we have our forums across the Caribbean connecting with one another. And again, monitoring everything as it goes by day, the new rules, the new travel restrictions that are put in place. I'm doing a lot of lecturing online for the University of the West Indies, School of Business and Applied Arts. And the work continues. So we're anticipating another eventful year in 2021, but we await guidance. And I want to thank you also, Brother Brian Muhammad, for allowing me the opportunity to share some thoughts from a perspective from this side of the world in Trinidad, in the Eastern Caribbean. And I want to urge you as well to continue the great work that you're doing through this magnificent forum, because these kinds of platforms are also needed now more than ever before.
Yes, sir. Well, we appreciate you, brother. And again,
Thank
we
you,
look
sir.
forward to our next visit in the next few
Yes,
weeks.
sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
And of course, we'll be in this coming year. And may Allah bless you and your family with Godspeed and health and everything for the coming year as well. And so we look forward to when that time comes.
Thank you, and same to you, Brother Brian.
Yes, sir. So, brothers and sisters, we want to thank you for, again, viewing our program today. We want, again, as we make an appeal to you every week, that we want to know how we're doing. And of course, you can leave comments in this comment section below. You can also email us at contact at nnvnews.com. And that's scrolling across the bottom. We want to know how we're doing. We want to bring you programming that you are interested in and how we can do it better. Um, and we just, again, take your ears and your eyes and your time. We don't take any of that for granted. And we're grateful for you and everything that you do out there in the community. Because believe me, anybody who keeps up with the international, this is what you want to hear. And with the network, there are programs throughout the week on different topics, different areas, and we encourage you to take part in that information. As Dr. David Muhammad talked about the need for accurate information, and we try to bring you that no matter what program on the network that you are looking at any given time during the week. We want you to let us know and and communicate with us so that we can make it that much better. So there's nothing else to be said. We want to thank those that work in the background. I guess that's the kind of thing that we do at the end of the year. You thank everybody who has been involved in making this network and what we do here so significant. And so we look forward. We'll be talking to you, of course, into 2021, God willing, next week. And we plan to have just as quality a show that we did today. We want to make sure that we have one next week. And we do that with your support. So support us, and we promise that we will always bring something good back to you. Thank you.
Be a part of the force that powers truth in journalism. Your support helps to combat false media. Cash App NNV News.